Good morning and welcome to the first session on chapter 4. So these are the topics today. Introduction to the poverty scenario, what it is all about. Now, poverty in India is not only a challenge. So the definition for poor is quite challenging and quite difficult also. Good morning and welcome to the first session on chapter 4. The current challenges facing the Indian economy, and this chapter we are going to talk about poverty, which is one of the biggest challenges that has ever been faced in terms of the economy. Now, poverty is something that if you start trying to understand, if you start going deeper into it, you will start feeling that why is this situation available or persistent in so many countries? Why is that we are not being able to cure over the poverty for so many years? But then this has been the challenge that is being faced by most of the economists in the world, and in this chapter we are going to learn why poverty in India. So just moving forward, let's try to understand what are the topics that we are going to cover today. So these are the topics today. Introduction to the poverty scenario, what it is all about. Poverty at the outset. Let's first try to understand why poverty even comes into the Indian economy, and then how the poor people are being identified. So this entire ideology, the entire mindset here is to understand what is poverty and what drives poverty into the nation. So moving forward, introduction onto the situation called as poverty. India has been a country that has been known for its rich diversity, language, ethics, values and principle. India has been a benchmark, an example, an ideal for so many nations for its rich heritage altogether. But why is that? A country with so much of knowledge, so much of intellectual, so much of brand and image still suffering from poverty. The reason for it is not just the population. The reason for it is not just the backwardness, but there are so many reasons that drive people into poverty. Poverty is not just a situation, poverty is not that is being forced upon, but it is a reality that needs to be dealt inside and that needs to be looked up and that can be solved in the long run. So let us try to understand how poverty has set into the country altogether. India has taken several decades in terms of attaining the independence. So our first thing itself is that we have fought for 5.5 decades. 55 long years after the outset of independence. Almost today we are 73rd year we are going to celebrate our independence. But then in that 73 long years, India has been still struggling with a very simple question: how to make people get their basic needs. What makes them struggle? What is that factor that we are lagging behind in terms of not able to satisfy the need of our citizens? Now, providing that basic needs to the people and reduction of poverty has been our biggest challenge. We have been trying to find out policies, methodologies to satisfy that common man, to satisfy that common citizen, trying to understand his needs, trying to give him that food, shelter and clothing, but yet we have not reached to a conclusion. It has been a very big challenge. It has been something which we have not been able to understand, able to realize altogether. So that is why poverty becomes not just a situation but becomes a question mark that still needs to be answered by many of our experts. If you go back here, the pattern of development that has been successive in the last 5 years plan altogether, if you start looking here, has been always trying to emphasize on the word called as upliftment of poor. Why? We had always been looking into the situation of making the poor people get to the next level. We want them to come above the poverty line. We do not want the poor to become the poorest. We want the poor to become an average income holder in our country. We believe that every situation that is leading to the creation of poverty, that is leading to the creation of any situation in this country, is primarily because somewhere the basic needs have not been met. Somewhere the government is still lacking in terms of satisfying the people. We have been talking about great infrastructural change. We have been talking about a global economy. We want to be the best manufacturing hub. There are so many factors that we are interested and we want to develop. But unfortunately, the biggest problem still lies that about 20% of India's population still lies below the poverty line. That is quite alarming, and there have been several research that has been done on the areas of poverty, trying to uplift the people, trying to bring them back to normalcy, trying to make them feel that they are equal to every single citizen in this country. So let's try to have a quite good look into how this poverty can be eradicated and how poverty can be taken out of this nation altogether. Now, moving forward, poverty at the outset. Now, poverty in India is not only a challenge. It is not something where you take poverty as a challenge and solve it. It is about a concern altogether. Now, when we were struggling to get freedom from the Britishers, it felt like a challenge. It felt for every single citizen of the country. Can we fight against the mighty British Empire who ruled India for more than 300 years? Can we take them out of this Indian subcontinent and make a day for us where we can proudly proclaim, this is India, this is my country? But then, after independence, the biggest challenge ever that the Indian government has been facing is poverty. We still are not reaching a position, we still have not reached a conclusion on this topic where we have been able to solve and tell to the world that India is 100% poverty free. We have still been struggling, we have still been trying to find a solution how to address the needs of the common man. Now, when we look at the number, about 260 million people are not able to meet their basic needs. That's about 26 crore people what we can talk about. It's a big number altogether, I would like to say here. But then when we start looking into poverty itself, that has got different facets, that have got different face altogether, that have got different meaning altogether. Now, when you start looking at this, it has been changing from place to place across time, and it has been described in many ways. So poverty has not got a single line definition. Poverty is not something that could be just described in one simple sentence. Poverty does not mean that I'm not getting food, I'm getting not my shelter or clothing factors altogether. Poverty will keep changing, will keep moving in terms of definition from place to place, from time to time. Yesterday, what was considered as a basic need can change today. So, poverty will also change its line of approach. Poverty will also change the dimensions altogether. That's why we always state that poverty is not a one-time situation or a one-time challenge that can be solved by any of the experts. It will keep changing according to the need of the people. So it's very, very important. It is highly important that we understand it and we try to solve it in a phased manner altogether. Most often, people think poverty is a situation that people want to escape, and that's why poverty is a call to action. If I become poor, if I don't have money to satisfy my needs, if I don't have money to look into my basic factors, not able to take care of my family, I look at poverty as a route to escape. When people ask me this question, why you are not able to satisfy your basic needs? Why are you not able to send your children to school? Why is that you are not able to take a basic insurance or a health care for your family? Automatically the answer that comes from you is poverty. Poverty becomes a route of escapism. People believe that under the cover of poverty, you will be able to escape. You will become dependent on the government, and the government has to feed you altogether. Poverty calls for action. Poverty does not say that it's a situation that needs to be considered, that needs to become a helplessness altogether. It puts the government under severe pressure. Every time when you see those big numbers hitting the screen, hitting the paper and telling that India still needs to abolish poverty, India has got so many people lying below the poverty line, it is an alarming situation for the government, because the government has to feed them, the government has to give them some minimum money in terms of support, bring up the family. So poverty becomes an easier way for most of the people in our country to go back and say that I am poor. I am poor leads to an action altogether. It leads to a pressurized situation for the government. Moreover, if you start understanding for the poor and the wealthy alike a call for change in the world so that many more may have enough to eat and adequate shelter can be provided. What is the difference between poor versus rich? Let us try to understand these two words very clearly today in economics. When I say you are poor and when I say you are rich, what is the difference altogether? Is it only the money factor? Is it only the accessibility factor? Or is it the status factor? Or is it about the wealth factor? The understanding here is that for a poor, every single thing becomes an excuse. If I am poor, I am using it as an excuse and I am not able to satisfy. I feel that even the small basic things that are available today in this universe will become costly, will become expensive. I am not meant for it. I am not blessed in any way to have those basic necessities. For a rich, it becomes a reason. Because I am rich, because I am wealthy, because I can afford those kind of factors, this becomes an important thing for me. I can go ahead and I will buy it and I will show to the world that yes, I am capable. I can access to that level. So whenever you read in the papers that there are so many billionaires living in the country, equally there are so many people who are living under the poverty line. This is the state of affair for a great country like India, which has produced more than 27 billionaires. But still we go back and say to this world that we do have people, 20% of the total population, who are living below the poverty line. The reason for this is that we need to look for an action. We need to look for a situation where the gap between the rich and the poor can be reduced. If you keep increasing the gap, if you keep increasing the bridge altogether, automatically what happens here is that the rich will keep on growing richer and the poor will keep on becoming poor. So at one point of time, we need to bridge the gap. We need to bring in a balance so that poverty can be eradicated from this great country. Now moving forward, who are poor? Now this is a very, very important question and an interesting question too. Who are the poor people in our country? Is that the common man who walks on the road? Is that the common man who sits in that shop? Is that the common man who keeps traveling in any of the bus or public transport? Is he poor? Is he the person who is not having enough money? So the definition for poor is quite challenging and quite difficult also. Scholars identify the poor on the basis of occupation and ownership of assets. Quite a big word, but let us try to understand in a simple manner. Does your occupation tell you, are you rich or poor? If I am an owner of a company, does it immediately classify me as a rich person? If I am a worker working in a manufacturing sector, am I classified as a poor? The questions are quite tricky enough. But let's try to decode the meaning altogether. Occupation here tells me the capability in terms of income. So when I say that I work as a software engineer in an IT firm, what immediately hits the mind of people is that the occupation is providing me a very good income altogether. So I am not poor. As a software engineer in India, I am not poor because my occupation gives me my identity that I am earning a very good income altogether. On the other hand, if I just go ahead and tell people in India, I am working as the owner of a tea shop, people think that I am poor. People think that I am below that line. I am not that software engineer earning lakhs of rupees or earning some thousands and thousands of rupees. But here, that poor tea shop owner is also under an occupation. He is a self-styled working person. He is doing some business and he is also earning some money, but we do not know exactly how much he is earning. He is not under a structured system altogether. He might not own great flats or he might not own great lands or apartments altogether, but he might also own some assets. His classification of asset might not be understandable to people. So for the experts, it has always been very, very difficult to answer this question, who really is poor in India? Is it just based on occupation? Is it based on income? Is it based on lifestyle? Or is it based on your background? So all these questions still lie as a dilemma in the mind of the people. We are not still able to get an answer for it altogether. So at some point of time, we need to get on to the bottom of this and try to understand why poverty exactly happens in India. Now, second thing, they also state that the rural poor work mainly as landless agriculture labor, cultivators with very small land, income is very less, they're just engaged on a part-time basis, on a seasonal basis, so they don't have a regular income. So somewhere down the lane, again the question of money becomes a very, very important and interesting topic. Suppose you are going to go and tell people that I am getting 1,000 rupees per hour for the job which I am doing. People immediately intend to calculate your income on a weekly basis, monthly or on a yearly basis. So you get categorized, you get classified based on your income. Similarly, in economics, the experts classify the people based on the income they are able to make over a period of time. If they are not able to make income, if they are not able to create an income for themselves, automatically they will come under the classification of poor. So there are people who are poor in the rural sector also. There are people who are poor in the urban sector also. Poor are everywhere. But what is the classification of poor? That becomes quite challenging for all of us to define. Why? Because a person who is earning 500 rupees by doing a labor job in a big metropolitan city in India is still considered to be poor because he is under the poverty line. A person who is earning 200 rupees in a rural sector area is still considered to be poor because in that standards again he becomes lesser or below the poverty line. So for us, the classification itself is on income base. So one of the most important factors that you will be learning in this chapter and you will be learning forward in economics is that income is one of the important classification to pull you out of poverty. So once you are being defined through income, automatically you will not be able to go back and take poverty as an escapism route altogether. The next factor, the urban poor are largely in the overflow of rural poor because they are migrated. In the rural sector, the migration is very less. They are still people working in the same land, in the same agricultural background, earning some meager money. But for a person who has migrated from the rural sector to those big cities in India, there is even more a challenge. Why? Because he has now come to a place where the meager income that was earned by him in the rural sector is not even enough. The money that is being paid in the urban sector is not enough for his survival. So he is in a double situation where he is not able to get enough money to survive his needs altogether. So the urban poor are the people who are like the floating population. They are migrated from place X to place Y in search of job, in search of better life, but yet they are not able to satisfy their basic needs. They are stuck somewhere. So that is why in India, poverty lies everywhere. It is not enclosed to a particular region. It is not been sticking to a particular area altogether. It is available everywhere. So it needs to be overcome in a different stages altogether. The next factor is that laborers do have a variety of casual jobs and they do involve in different kinds of activity to overcome this poverty. Now, poverty, though it is being defined through income, though it is being classified through the money what you get, at the same time, the poverty also teaches you how to overcome it. So what people try to do here is that they try to find menial jobs. They try to find some part-time jobs through which they can overcome this poverty. Everybody knows that with a given span of 24 hours that is available to you, you can try to do multiple jobs. You can try to find multiple flows of income for you through which you can overcome this poverty. So at some point of time, the poor people decide that I don't want to remain poor. I don't want to stick to one job. I want to go outside. I want to see myself richer. I want to find avenues of growth. With my skill, with my ability, whatever mindset I have, let me try to explore opportunities in the urban area, work part-time, work on multiple jobs, try to earn some more money and get out of the poverty. They want to find a route to escape out of poverty. So that is why who are poor still remains a very big question. Everybody are poor and everybody will become rich. That's what economics always believes in the society altogether. Now, moving forward, how are the poor people identified? Do they have an ID card? Does the government give you some factor to say that I am poor? Is it written there? Definitely not. Because identification of poor has always been a challenge to the government of India. Now, for this, there is a need to develop a scale of measurement to measure poverty, and the factors that are chosen for this to make up the criteria is even more be looked in with the help of a microscope altogether. The mechanism is quite complicated. But what does the government of India have done is that they have always felt that there is some mechanism, there is some tool that needs to be involved. Now, what is that tool? What is that mechanism that you can think about by bringing in, by identifying people in terms of poverty or being poor? Now, the one common factor that has always been accepted in the pre-independent area was by Dadabhai Naoroji, the grand old man of India, who had first bought in an ideology to understand the concept of poverty line. What did he do? He said that he used the menu for a prisoner and he used an appropriate prevailing prices in order to arrive at what may be called as the jail cost of living. A very, very interesting topic or an interesting ideology altogether. From some point, from the income, we are now dipping towards a very, very important concept called as food. Because ultimately, every single person on this earth is working in order to earn food, in order to feed his family altogether. So, some 100 years back, our great economist, a great four-vision thinker, Dadabhai Naoroji, sir, had told that what is the jail cost living for one person? If there is a person who is staying as a prisoner in jail, for him, what is the cost that will be incurred in terms of a one-term meal altogether? If that amount or if that standard of living is being affordable for a person, then we classify him above the poverty line. If he is not even able to afford that kind of living, if he finds that even that cost of living is too much, that means he is definitely below the poverty line because his accessibility is pretty much low. So that is what we are going to understand here. We are going to drill down to that level of understanding whether that person is capable of having one-time meal altogether. Now, moving forward. However, only the adults in the jail were considered because at that point of time we didn't have a juvenile prison or the system altogether. So taking a male adult, he felt that this is probably an appropriate manner and that is how the cost of living can be arrived. Now that is one of the important things that you need to understand in terms of poverty. Why? Because the word called as cost of living is very, very important when it comes to economics. Now, living, according to many countries, is actually a gift. It's actually a boon. Today, if you go and say that, sir, I got a citizenship to live in Switzerland or in Singapore or in US or in UK, it is a boon for you. Why? Because you are able to live in one of the most advanced cities or countries of the world. So, when you go ahead and say that, I am able to live in India, in a particular place, whichever place that is, that means there is a cost of living that is involved. Now, how is that cost of living calculated altogether? It might be through from your rent, it might be through your food expenses, your social expenses, so many factors that will be considered altogether. But ultimately, for a person, for an adult to live in a city, to live in a village, to live in a town, whichever area is it, what is the basic cost of living? His living comes under an expense category altogether. So if he is able to match and meet all the expenses, then the cost of living is automatically managed. He is able to survive. And many a times what happens is that for the adjustment, he assumed that 1/3 of the population consisted of children and half of them consume very little. So Dadabhai Naoroji sir had considered at that point of time that 1/3 of India's population is children. So there was an adjustment mechanism which he had taken, and half of them did not even have proper food at that time. So what he was trying to arrive here is that he was just trying to arrive at a model, a very, very bleak model which is not exact to the core altogether to identify the poor. But then coming to the modern times from Dadabhai Naoroji, today if you see in India, it is almost the same factor. If you are going to consider about an adult who is living in India in a particular city, the cost of living starting from the basic expenses to the most highest level expenses like in healthcare or insurance also will matter a lot in terms of living in a particular country. Now, if you're going to look into countries like UK and Australia, where the taxation rate is very high, where the expenses in terms of rent is very high. Now, similarly, there needs to be an income to match it. So, in India also, we start assuming that the income that is being earned by a person should be able to match the basic cost of living. Unless and until an income is generated in such a manner, there is no point in living in a particular city. You might live in the most advanced city, you might live in the most advanced country in the world. But if you are not able to generate income to satisfy that living conditions, then there is no point in doing a job, or there is no point in living in that particular city altogether. So what we try to arrive in economics is that the basic factors, the basic governance of making the advanced mechanisms to the basic connection in terms of how a person can live, how a person can adjust, and how a person can satisfy his needs altogether. Now, moving forward, with this, we come to the conclusion of the first session. I hope and believe that this session was interesting, informative, and educative. In the next session, we will learn about the different means and methods of poverty. Until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today.